Yeah, thanks for joining our webinar, Data Protection in the Age of Remote Work, brought to you by Webair and Veeam. We're going to go ahead and get started now. My name is Sagi Brody. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Webair. I'm also part of the Veeam Vanguard program. And today I'm joined by Karinne Bessette, who's a Product Strategy Technologist at Veeam. Hey, Karinne, how are you?
I'm all right. How about you?
Doing well. I'd love it if you can give a quick intro as to what you do there at Veeam, and I know that you spent a lot of time with teams, so I'd love to hear your involvement with that recently.
Yeah, so Microsoft Teams, if you haven't heard, exploded last year when we had an entire evolve of our work from home life, and it's kind of helped make a collaborative interface for modern workplaces. But today we're going to talk to you about all of the reasons why you need to protect that and have some type of backup process, as well as a shared responsibility model in here.
Awesome. Thanks. It's great to have you. A quick note, if you don't know Webair, we are a managed services provider, managed cloud provider. We're based out of New York. We've been in business for over 20 years, and we really focus on customizing flexible managed enterprise solutions, typically for mid-market enterprise organizations, ones who have compliance requirements or intricate network requirements or similar. Our core service offerings gravitate towards either hosting production infrastructure by way of hosted private clouds, virtual private clouds, VDI deployments, hybrid with colo or interconnected to public clouds, as well as a ton of backups and disaster recovery. We have been recognized by some of the leading industry analysts recently, including Gartner and IDC, included in their Magic Quadrant reports, and some others. And if you haven't heard of Veeam, which I wouldn't believe, Karinne will give us some information on them.
Thank you. Yep. So this is just a kind of overview of Veeam by the numbers, our bookings, our global kind of reach, as well as being one of the top of the Fortune 500s. Personally, one of my favorite scores on here is going to be the Net Promoter Score, which means it's not just us saying that our product is easy and user-friendly, but it's the industry giving us great feedback as to that being the case. Before we go too much into that, we're going to kick over to Teams. Teams is one of the fastest growing business apps on the market. They have about 91% of the market share for Fortune 100 companies, and they've just been growing more and more over the last, I'd say, 12 months. So what does that mean? Well, that means there's going to be a lot of data in the back end, and there's several reasons why you'd want to consider protecting that data in the first place. We did a survey out to end users as to reasons why they may need to protect the data, and number one on the list is going to be accidental deletion. I don't know about you, but I've accidentally deleted a file and hoped it was there, and unfortunately, whatever retention that was supposed to be held on that file, it was not, and I was left in the end without having that data for whatever need that was. Of course, retention policies and gaps, we'll go over this one a little further in this slide deck about the shared responsibility model and where their protection ends and your responsibility begins. These middle slides, or these middle two options here, I see as kind of the same side of, or two different sides of the same coin. I like to say an administrator's worst nightmare is going to be ransomware. And when a company's worst nightmare is going to be that rogue administrator. They're two different attacks on the same type of data that is done through, say, an elevated and privileged account that can be super detrimental to all of that data's integrity. Coming over to legal and compliance, I know there's a lot of regulations out there. The software as a service market is growing and growing exponentially, meaning that it's still waiting for all of those regulation and compliance reasons to catch up, but they're starting to kind of develop out there, and you're going to need to keep an eye out for what your company is going to retain in order to not have any type of problems if you get audited. And with any type of hybrid or hybrid managed deployments, even if you're in the progress of migrating, having a backup of that copy prior to that migration process can help give you that peace of mind so that you know that you're not going to be missing any end user data when it's all said and done. And that kind of brings us to the seventh reason, and this is a newer reason, which is Microsoft Teams data structure. There's a lot of complexities of this data structure just because it's not a self-contained application. It's kind of scattered throughout all of Office 365's environment. And again, we'll talk about that one a little bit more in depth later, as well as some of the legacy methods and the new method that we're using to back up that data. The primary reasons didn't come from just a bunch of us sitting around thinking of different ways you could lose data. We've actually sent out several surveys to end users, and this is the most recent survey, which is going to be from a cloud multi-hybrid research report from 2020. And a lot of these reasons haven't changed. We're starting to get a larger view from the market saying, yes, we're recognizing these types of data loss, especially when it comes to software as a service administrators saying, yes, you need to protect this. And with those numbers, we've seen a big rise in all of the backups and people realizing that they need to back that up. Have you seen any rise on your side and from the community saying that, yes, they're realizing that they need to protect this data?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Office 365 in general, that, and as it relates to data protection, it's one of the worst assumptions in the industry. You know, it's taken a while for people to actually understand the reality. But you know, I know you're going to go into it in a minute, but you know, people sort of move to Office 365 and other SaaS platforms with this horrible assumption that I'm using Microsoft, I'm using SaaS, they must back up my data, they must handle that for me, they must take care of everything. You know, I'm absolving my hands of it, and unfortunately, you know, people learn the hard way that that's not exactly the case. What we have also seen on the rise is just not only ransomware attacks, but extremely sophisticated ransomware attacks. And I've literally seen it multiple times with customers where attackers have gone into the customer's local environment and got into their backup servers and destroyed all their local backups and their offsite backups. And then got ahead and ransomware them. So sort of removing all the options for restore, which is, you know, we'll talk later about how we can mitigate for that. But I think the assumptions are getting more rampant. You know, people don't really know what they're using, and the attackers are getting more sophisticated. And I think those two things come together creates a very, you know, dangerous environment.
Excellent point. And that leads us directly into the next slide that we have here. And if you're not familiar with the resource Microsoft Shared Responsibility Model, this is a model developed by Microsoft to give customers a clear idea of what they are responsible for and what Microsoft is responsible for in any of their cloud relationships, from software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. The demonstration that you see here is from the software as a service breakdown chart we've developed to make it a little bit easier to digest the information. As you can see, Microsoft's primary responsibility is around the uptime of your infrastructure, as well as making sure you have that geo-redundant data in a short-term recycling bin process. When the customer's responsibility comes in, it means access control, who has access to that data, who is an administrator over that data, as well as any types of copy and any type of full retention of that data. So what does that mean? If you have a compromised privileged account in your infrastructure that goes in and removes data from Microsoft, they are not responsible for recovering that data back to your infrastructure. And we know compromised accounts are one of the biggest concerns out there. There's all kinds of password policies and two-factor authentication, but just like you said, ransomware is becoming resilient. It's getting smarter. Phishing emails can trick people into giving up their two-factor authentication code without even realizing that they've given that data to a malicious source. So
So
protecting,
Karinne,
yeah.
just so Yeah, so just so I understand that correctly, when I think about Microsoft's Office 365 infrastructure and the resilience, they're just going to ensure that the service is up and running, and they're going to be using multiple data centers on the back end so that they don't go down. But the actual data that's residing in all those facilities is exactly the same. There's no sort of point in time snapshot capability. You can't call them and say, can you make my mailbox or my SharePoint data or my Teams look like it did a week ago, right?
Right. They're not responsible for, say, the integrity of the data. They're just responsible for the availability of the data that you've requested. Now, the next question I usually get is, what about that recycling bin? Most recycling bin options within a soft delete cycle on Microsoft is actually only 30 days of keeping that file back for you to be able to restore it yourself. But industry, about 140 days before most companies realize that they need to recover any type of data, especially if you had someone leave your company. So like an employee leaves, whether it's for good reasons or bad reasons, they come back and sue for any type of intellectual property, maybe 2 months later. You're not able to prove that the intellectual property was created on your resources, which means you may lose a lawsuit from an individual. Just small things like this, making sure you have a copy of a data even for the retention of when an employee leaves, can be crucial. Let's go next here. And that brings us to Teams. We mentioned this a little earlier. Teams is not a self-contained application. It's actually an abstraction layer for many of Microsoft's backend offerings, such as Exchange, SharePoint, and OneDrive for Business. Exchange will hold things, say, such as an archive of your messages back between different users. SharePoint is your channels. And anytime you send a file through through Teams, it's actually sent through OneDrive. The legacy method of backing up any type of data exchange with Microsoft Teams used to be through each of these backend applications, which means whenever we restored data, it wasn't really back to the original location. It was kind of export and then trying to get it back to that original location. Recently, though, Microsoft has given us a new API to access the backend metadata and configuration data for Microsoft Teams, which has now allowed us to tap into, say, the settings, the members, as well as the team structure itself. So we have a console to be able to restore back to the original locations for granular items within channels and tabs. This allows a much faster restore process, and we'll go into what this looks like within the console here in a little bit. So team support, got ahead of myself on the slide there, gives you full protection over your team's data and your team's industry components, such as a granular search. So you're not just searching across a single Teams item, you're able to search across your entire organization worth of backups of Teams whenever you're working with a purpose-built software and backup and recovery for Microsoft Teams within the software. This integration with the The integration with the Microsoft APIs allows for the metadata, which means you're able to get the applications and components. Sorry, this slide got shoved in here. This brings us to the Teams Explorer. The Veeam Explorer for Microsoft Teams was something developed with version 5 of Office 365. Since we're supporting a new application, we've made a new Explorer. This means you're able to see data in a format that makes sense to your end users and being able to restore data without needing to be very familiar with the Teams application. This brings our total number of restore options up to 40 through all 4 Explorers. Now we come to either manage or, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. So thank you for the overview. And you know, I've been using the Veeam VBO or Veeam Backup for Office 365 for many years. At Webair, we delivered as a service, and it's really amazing to see the evolution of the product. I think you guys are up to V5 now, where and we'll look at it in a minute, but essentially you're delivering a completely sort of transparent and inclusive solution for teams, right? You mentioned that, and I didn't know this, prior to working with the product, but really Microsoft is just sort of storing Teams data spread across SharePoint and OneDrive and their other platforms, right? It's not, like you said before, it's not its own applications. The Teams data is just coming from different spots, and it's great to see how with Veeam software, you don't have to know where things live. You can just tell it what you want, what you want to back up and restore, and it kind of does it all for you. So thank you for the overview. But the next question is, you have this great piece of software here, like other enterprise software packages. These components need to be installed in a location. Obviously, in order to store backups, you're going to need to provide it with storage. You're going to need to run these components, and so essentially, you need a place for this to live. And this is a diagram. This is one diagram of what the Office 365 Backup product looks like. And so organizations really have two options. You can install this. You can purchase the Veeam software and install it and manage it yourself. It can be run on premises on your own hardware. You can run it on top of public cloud infrastructure. Or you can say, just like I did not want to be in charge of my own Exchange servers and my own SharePoint and all that, and I wanted to consume it as a service. I'm trying to get out of the infrastructure business, and I don't even want to be responsible for the backups, especially understanding how important they are, which is why we see on the screen here, managed or do it yourself. And obviously, Webair is providing this as a service, meaning we are taking the capabilities of the Veeam software. We work very closely with Veeam, and we will run everything on our customers' behalf, and allow our customers to just hold us accountable to an SLA. That when we say we back up not only your Teams data, but your Office 365, your OneDrive, your SharePoint, on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, and we retain the data for X period of time, you're entering into an agreement with us that you can just hold us accountable to that SLA. You don't have to worry about storage or running infrastructure or monitoring it or being accountable for it. And there's really no right or wrong. It just comes down to what is your appetite as an organization, as an IT department. What's your appetite for accountability? Do you want to just hold a third party accountable for it and pay for the SLA, or do you want to take on the infrastructure responsibility, the monitoring, ensuring things are encrypted and meeting your compliance requirements, managing the network integrations, maybe having to spin up express routes and all of that, or would you rather just consume it as a service? And like I said, I work with many customers, and depending on the type of organization you are, there's pros and cons to each. So Webair is delivering the Office 365 Backup as a service, and that now is inclusive of the Microsoft Teams backup and restore capability, which I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. But at part of it, what you're really looking at is a simple pricing model where your customers are paying per user per month. You don't have to back up the sort of entire organization. You can pick and choose by groups, and then we will deliver as a service. We'll give you options to specify the retention for how long you want to retain the data before. You want to be able to go back and restore something from 5 years ago, maybe for a legal hold capability. And we'll run it all as a service. We can store it on different types of encrypted storage. We have targets in different countries, about 8 different locations throughout the world. And the reason we are offering all those locations is really just we have some very large customers who have very specific data sovereignty requirements who need to keep source data within the same country. And so wherever you can sort of spin up infrastructure with Microsoft, we have backups and restore capabilities within the same region. And as mentioned before, we handle all the networking. We handle the private networking between our infrastructure and Microsoft so that we can achieve extremely fast backup and restore. Those are some of the things people don't consider, but at the heart of all of this is infrastructure. It's networking, it's integration. So we do all that. We also maintain multiple copies of the data set in multiple locations. Some of our customers have very specific requirements around that too. And you can access all this from our portal. As I mentioned at the beginning, so a big part of our business is backups and disaster recovery. So you can log into the Webair portal and see what your Office 365 backups looks like, where the data is being stored, last time the backups ran, and all that. As I mentioned, you can dictate for us specifics for jobs. You can say, I'd like my executive's data to be backed up hourly with a 12-year retention, and everyone else daily is fine, and then only going back 6 months. So you'll be able to see all those jobs that Webair is running on your behalf from our portal, and you can actually see what data is being backed up. Some people don't want specific types of data backed up for different groups. So you'll be able to see all that. You can see you get audit reports and compliance reports of the last time the backups ran and all that. Typical type of integrations here. Specific to mailbox backups, you can actually browse all the backups that we're storing in your private encrypted repo, and you can actually just go ahead and browse, select the specific date and time that you want to see the snapshot for, and you can actually go and see subject and titles for emails. You can't actually read the emails for compliance reasons. You'll be able to browse what Webair is storing in the repo, and then through the software, you can go and select a point in time and revert a mailbox or revert a OneDrive directory or a SharePoint site, or now even Teams data and channels and posts to look exactly like it looked like on a certain date. And I think that's a big piece of Office 365 that's missing. People that have been in IT for a long time, there's just this, like point in time backup and restore is sort of like table stakes, to revert a virtual server or a directory to look like it did on a certain day. Like we mentioned at the beginning, you just cannot do that with the tools that Microsoft gives you. So with this as a service solution, you can do that. So in our portal, you can then access all these different application browsers that Veeam has as part of the solution. And what those are their rich applications that run on your devices and your desktop, which will allow you to directly interact with the data and choose where you want to restore your items to. So in the case for the Microsoft Teams backup and restore, you would spin up the application. You're going to connect it to your private Webair repo, and then you'll be able to select different organizations. You can restore entire teams. You can do all the teams in the organization, specific teams. Here are some of the options. Karinne, are there any specific options that are worth mentioning just on the team restores or the per user restores?
Yeah, if you want to go back to the previous window we had up there, one more forward. Right here, the changed and missing items, if you get a request that you need to restore back to original location, maybe a list of items, you can use this option to only do the changed or missing so that you're not restoring all of that data if it doesn't need to be restored. As well, the permissions and memberships, if you don't want them to have the original permissions and memberships, you can uncheck these boxes. So you are very flexible on the type of restore back to the original location with this wizard.
Awesome, yeah. So, and we can also select specific team members. You don't have to restore, obviously, the entire team. We can also restore specific channels, posts, and tabs. So that's what we can see here. Anything notable on these screenshots?
We're able to restore tabs. It's not just the files and post. You're also able to restore back different versions of a file. So if you have multiple versions of a file and they need a version from a week ago, you are able to select and recover that version, even if you've restored for the most current point, state, and time.
Great. And Karinne, before we continue on, there's actually a question that I thought we can maybe we can address now because I thought it was relevant. What if a company has a hosted MS Office in the cloud? Wouldn't that company supply backup for the Office 365? Or does that question need to be addressed with the host company? Well, I don't think that this necessarily applies to if you're hosting MS Office in the cloud. It really depends. If you're saving your data to OneDrive, then you do need to still I would assume you still want to back up that data in the way that we're describing here. Storing the data in OneDrive is not going to give you any sort of inherent restore capability. So this is, I think that the question is relevant. Yeah.
Yeah, you would need to definitely address this with your host company. Don't assume that they're doing the backup for you.
Yeah, and again, like anytime you're using as a service or a hosted solution, make no assumptions. Ask. There is no question that is off the table. You're entrusting your data to a third party, and for them to take on IT responsibilities. So ask all those questions up front so that you don't get surprises later. So going back to the restore capabilities, and by the way, if anyone on the webinar would like an actual demo of the product, we're happy to do so. I'm not a big fan of doing live demos on the webinar, but we're happy to do so. There's so many different features that we can always schedule that with you. But obviously here we can see the ability to restore specific tabs. When you select an item to restore, be it a post or a tab or a channel, obviously you can select the date that you'd like it restored from, or select any of the objects within a certain time period as well. Karinne, anything else you want to add on these capabilities here?
One of my favorite features is actually on this slide, and on that drop-down menu, you see the option Send To. Send To gives you the ability to send out via an email to the end user with an attachment of the file that you want to restore to them. That means you don't have to restore back to the original location. You don't have to export that item, import that item just to be able to send it back to satisfy a ticket request. Directly from the console, you can send that item back to the end user, taking out 2 or 3 steps some of the times to satisfy any type of ticket request.
Yeah, and I think that is a great feature. You don't have to restore items back to the original location, and this is not only true for what we're seeing here with the posts on Teams, but even from mailbox data. When you use the Office 365 backups as a service, if you want to restore a specific message, you can push it right back into Office 365. You can also export it as a PST. You can export it as a PDF, and you can download it. And so you have a ton of options here. And like Karinne said, if someone just needs to get contents of data, or you're working with a legal team, this makes it super fast to get people the data they need without having to jump through all these different hoops here. And the last one is just files, right? And so these are any file that's sort of transacted through Teams. Ultimately, anything that's stored in OneDrive can be restored. And just like you mentioned here, we can actually just save the file locally as well. We don't have to push it back up to the cloud. One other question that came in, or really just to follow up the last one, was about storing data using SharePoint. So if you're using SharePoint online, part of Office 365, then this is all relative, and you can certainly use our backup as a service to protect that data and provide you with the long-term retention and restore capability. If you're using a private SharePoint service, there are other backup offerings that we provide so that you have exactly the same capabilities as well. Again, it just goes back to that. Don't make any assumptions. If someone's running a sort of private SharePoint environment for you, then I would assume that they can also provide an inherent backup capability. So that's the Microsoft Teams Explorer here. So once you have this backups as a service, you're given this sort of software explorer where you can browse, access export reports showing that your backups are running when they're supposed to run, provide them to your compliance managers, and really fulfill any restore request, respond to ransomware. We've certainly seen malware that gets into local environments and just destroys mailbox data, destroys the file structure, all that. And it's only a matter of time, that those viruses sort of spread out and do horrible things to other platforms like Teams. So this really gives you that assurances. Karinne, any final notes on the software? Anything else you want to mention on here?
That the fact that Teams streams are now being saved to SharePoint. So that means that we're able to support the backup of streams data. It's being in the process of migrated over based on the Microsoft application, but there's due to be, by the end of this month, everyone on the saving to SharePoint. So streams will be supported.
Awesome. That's great. And I think just in time too, right? All of this is very relative to COVID, and obviously, Office 365 and Microsoft Teams more specifically sort of, we all know, exploded and used to popularity. And that kind of brings me to the final topic that you want to talk about today. And even the questions that are being posted now sort of touch upon this, but we're really moving to a hybrid IT and a hybrid cloud paradigm. It's a new world. We don't have a production physical data center at point A, and we're gonna replicate all that to our disaster site at point B. The definition of our production environments is changing. It is still equipment on premises, but it's also hosted private clouds and data in public clouds and SaaS and PaaS. So we have to sort of look at it differently. And that was my pitch before COVID. Now, I think that is accelerating, and we have additional layers of things to deal with too, when people are working from home. And the first one that I'll say, and we talked about assumptions before, is, SaaS platforms in general, not only Office 365, but other platforms like Salesforce and similar, give us amazing functional capabilities, and we can outsource, the functionality of third parties. But before you run and use them, just understand how they fit within your existing frameworks for resilience and compliance and network integrations. And I'm not saying that they won't, but those are questions that you want to have at the onset, and you want them answered at the beginning. Then after the fact, if you have teams within your organization that just start using random SaaS platforms that are storing critical data, and then your compliance manager comes along later, it's going to be much more difficult. So if you design it right from the start, if you ask those questions and you have these additional services set up, like maybe the backups on Teams, I think that you can achieve compliance, and you can use these SaaS platforms without them being an exception to the rules that you've already established for your network security, and compliance, and disaster recovery. The next thing is, with work from home, endpoints are increasingly more in play, I would say. We have a lot more devices that are connected to corporate networks with people working from home. And so, don't forget about that. I think a lot of people are starting to adapt endpoint security, or zero trust type of tools, tools like maybe SentinelOne, Carbon Black, and the likes. But don't overlook the actual backups of the data on those devices too. If those are devices that are connected to your corporate WAN, let's say, and the users are storing critical data on those devices, understand if you need to back those up, and you'll have to do so. Webair offers backups as a service that not only backs up your traditional IT infrastructure, physical servers and virtual servers, and also servers in the cloud, but we do back up endpoints as well directly to our infrastructure, directly to our backups as a service. So for any remote devices or laptops or whatever, those can be directly backed up to us. Or do one better and force your users to use a remote desktop type of solution, or a VDI type of solution, so that those desktops are hosted within the cloud. You can control them, and then you have a completely secure perimeter. And so we do offer VDI services, and I'm not really talking about just hosted desktop. I'm talking about completely private cloud-based VDI that's sort of behind corporate firewalls and within your MPLS and WAN networks, and will meet the compliance requirements that you have today. And the last thing is, just from a networking perspective, there are some really great technologies out there that are sort of the 2.0 version of just, traditional remote access VPN, and those are kind of being bundled together as this new term SASE, which sort of combines the secure access gateway, zero trust, firewalls in the cloud, SD-WAN. And so I think between all of these sort of components here, there's certainly a sort of new paradigm for what the corporate IT infrastructure of the future looks like between SaaS and VDI. And the good news is you can kind of consume all that as a service from companies like Webair, and just like you can shift ownership, let's say for running the Exchange in the past Office 365, you can shift ownership for the backups and the restore, and the virtual desktops and all that. So specific to the backups, in addition to backing up Microsoft Teams data and everything else in Office 365, like I mentioned before, with the same integration, with the same as a service that we provide you, we can also provide you with the software, which is Veeam, to back up all of your local IT infrastructure, your VMware VMs and Hyper-V and your physical devices, and as I mentioned before, endpoints as well. One of the great things that just came out actually today, I believe V11 went GA today, is the ability to back up Mac OS X endpoints as well, which is great. So when I look at backups, our customers want full ownership. They want one vendor who's going to take full ownership and accountability for their entire data set, be it unstructured file data sitting on like NetApp filers or NAS, be it the endpoints, and obviously now even the Microsoft Teams Office 365 data. So that's what we're doing, and we're going to give our customers a very simple cost metric. It's just going to be billed based on the amount of data that we're storing, if it's traditional VMs, or based on users, if it's Office 365 data. And so there's price assurances. You're not paying for restores. You're not paying for egress. There's no IOP fees or any of that nonsense. It's a very simple long-term cost metrics. And then we also take ownership of managing and monitoring and scaling all that. So you need anything done, you can just call us and we'll handle the restore as a service, and we monitor all that. As I mentioned before, the VDI is its own. That's a whole separate webinar, but there's interesting differences between sort of desktops in the cloud, maybe on public cloud, versus a traditional private VDI type of environment, but running as a service, where you get all the benefits that you would get of running like Horizon View, but having a provider delivered to you as a service within your network. We do that, and then also there's a lot that we do as far as disaster recovery. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're focused on enterprise organizations, ones that have compliance requirements, like HIPAA or CGIS or SOC 2, GDPR. We can hit all those requirements. We can deliver our services within your existing corporate WAN, so it looks and feels and acts like it's part of your organization or your IT organization, and we can hit all the different legacy platforms. So if we're doing disaster recovery, we're going to support the physical boxes. We're going to support the IBM I series. We're going to support your unstructured file data. All these gotchas where people think I can't use an as a service because my environment, is a little too customized, or I need X or Y. That's actually where we shine. And the reason why we offer the backups for Office 365 and now for Microsoft Teams is because that is becoming a critical component of the corporate environment of the future. And so a lot of our customers are using us for full-on disaster recovery as a service, where we're giving them 15-minute response time SLAs, and we're doing all the network failover and owning the run books and all that. And obviously, as their production environments are shifting to SaaS, our service offerings are shifting as well. I don't want to get too deep into some of the other services, but I think when we talk about Office 365 and Microsoft Teams, it really is part of this larger hybrid conversation, and really what does the future of our IT departments look like. This is just a diagram of what some of our DR looks like. As I mentioned, there's a lot of compliances that we have to hit. When it comes to Microsoft Teams data and the rest of the backups that we do have multiple options for encryption. Some of those options include Webair not even being a party to the data, and so you don't even have us as a third-party provider who has access to the data, which is great. Also also sign business associate agreements even for that data if required as well. And this is where we have some of our infrastructure kits globally. So that is what we had for you today. Check if there's any other questions. Karinne, I don't know if you see other questions. I don't.
I don't see anything on this side.
Okay, well, thanks to everyone. There is a raffle. There is a raffle going on for all the attendees, and that will happen tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. on Webair's LinkedIn. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you.